Hey lifers, Dustin here, and it is finally time to talk about the one game that the entire 2017 college football season has been building and leading up to, and that is the 2018 College Football Playoff National Championship game. It's the champion of 2017, but they call it the 2018 champ. You know how it works. It's really dumb. And it doesn't make any sense, and I hate it with my whole heart. But it is the 2018 National Championship game between the number 3 Georgia Bulldogs and the number 4 Alabama Crimson Tide. I will put a little disclaimer at the very beginning of this video. Auburn fans, you may want to skip this one. These two SEC teams got here by having very different types of victories on Monday. Georgia, of course, won a classic 2-overtime shootout win. Well, shootout, run out, however you want to put it, win over Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl, while Alabama dominated Clemson in the trenches, limiting the Tigers to a season low in yardage as Alabama's defense took over in a win in the Sugar Bowl. Alabama leads the all-time series against the Bulldogs 38-25-4, with Nick Saban going 3-1 against the Georgia Bulldogs, with all 3 victories being in their last 3 meetings in 2008 in Athens, 2012 SEC Championship game, and their most recent meeting, 2015, a 38-10 Tide win in a rain-soaked Athens, with current Georgia head coach Kirby Smarts serving as Alabama's defensive coordinator. There are plenty of storylines going on in this game, not the least of which is this will be Georgia's very first true crack at a national championship since the 1980 season featuring Herschel Walker and Vince Dooley. Since 1980, 5 different SEC teams have won national championships. Perhaps it's finally Georgia's turn. Nick Saban will be trying to win his very first national championship at Alabama without Kirby Smart as his defensive coordinator. The good news is that the Tide's experience is ripe with big moments. If they are a true senior or a redshirt junior or younger, every single player on this Crimson Tide team has been in the playoff every single year. And if they are a true junior or younger, they have all played in the College Football Playoff National Championship game. This will also be the second ever national championship between 2 teams from the same conference. The only other time it happened was also the SEC, and also had Alabama in it in the 2012 BCS National Championship game between LSU and the Crimson Tide in LSU's de facto backyard in New Orleans. The Tide won that matchup 21-0 to secure Nick Saban's second national championship at Alabama. Almost said third because it was 2012. That doesn't make sense. This will be in Georgia's backyard, but Nick Saban is very familiar with that scene, with the building in the Georgia Dome / Mercedes-Benz Dome. Saban's Tide teams are 11-1 all-time, though I do expect that the crowd will be about 65-35% in favor of Georgia. The one that I think is getting talked about the most, of course, is that Saban is 11-0 all-time against former assistants, outscoring them by an average of 43-11 in those games, though I believe that all of those teams, out of all of 12 matchups now, including this one, this Georgia team of 2017 is by far the most talented of any of those other teams. So now that we've done a little bit of setting the table, let's talk about the actual game, and we'll start when Georgia has the ball, which of course the Bulldogs are led by a ferocious and never-ending run game. Senior running backs Nick Chubb and Sony Michel have combined for nearly 2,500 yards this season alone and 31 touchdowns. Chubb is running at 6.4 yards per carry, and Michel is at 8 yards per carry right now. These 2 players in the Rose Bowl ran it 25 times for 326 yards, averaging 13 yards a carry. Each player also had a touchdown score of at least 50 yards, with Sony Michel getting a 75-yarder as well. Throw in true freshman DeAndre Swift and his 600 yards and 7.8 yards per carry, and the Georgia rushing offense came into the bowl season ranked 11th in the nation in rushing offense, averaging 264 yards per game. The good news for Alabama is that the rush defense is their strength, even without linebacker Anthony Jennings, who had 3 tackles for loss and a sack in the Sugar Bowl, who will miss the national championship game with a leg injury after he had surgery. They are still much healthier at linebacker than they were at the end of November when they played Auburn. The Crimson Tide defense only allows about 94 rushing yards a game, good for 3rd best in the nation, and held Clemson to just 64 rushing yards on the night in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl, only 188 total yards, 260 yards lower than their average. The powerful Georgia rushing game also shows itself in other stats, such as the Bulldogs offense having the 4th best red zone offense in the nation and the 7th best third down percentage. A little bit of a counter to that, though, is that the Tide's defense is 17th in the nation in red zone defense and has allowed the 5th least amount of first downs in the nation. Another place where the Tide's defense matches up particularly well against Georgia's offense is in the scoring offense and the scoring defense. Georgia averages 34.9 points per game, good for 23rd in the nation. But Alabama is the best scoring defense in the nation, only allowing an average of 11.1 yards per game. To put that a little bit into context, Clemson had the number 2 scoring defense in the country and got outscored 4-1 in the Sugar Bowl. In my opinion, freshman quarterback Jake Fromm has been the perfect version of what has been coined the game manager, and in fact, he has reminded me a lot of A.J. McCarron at different points in the season. He has nearly 2,400 passing yards, 63.7 completion percentage, 23 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. That's really impressive considering true freshman quarterbacks tend to actually be more of a liability and hurt the team more than a guarantee and help the team when they're playing on one such as the caliber of the Georgia Bulldogs and get all the way to the national championship game. His favorite target, of course, is wide receiver Javon Wims, who has 704 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. Terry Godwin is also just shy of 600 receiving yards and has 6 touchdowns on the season himself. The problem is, the Dogs' passing attack came into the bowl season ranked 109th in the nation, only averaging about 170 yards through the air per game. Alabama's defense, meanwhile, has the Bednarik and Thorpe Award winner in defensive back Mika Fitzpatrick, who in the Sugar Bowl covered Clemson wide receiver Hunter Renfrow, also known as Thorn in Sabans' side, very well, essentially shutting him down the entire game until one long drive in the 4th quarter when things were essentially already under wraps for the Tide. I expect him to be on Wims most of the night in a similar fashion. I think if Alabama's defense feels comfortable and confident in run blitzes and allows those 2 deep safeties to stay in zone coverage, there's not going to be a whole lot of downfield opportunities for Fromm in this one. These 2 teams are kind of mirror images of each other, and I think the key on offense for both teams is the same thing. Try to figure out a way to get the passing game going, especially if you can get a few big plays down the field. Now, even against Alabama's number 7 ranked pass defense, I do think this still favors Georgia because I kind of trust the arm of Fromm more than I trust the arm of Hurts at times. Yes, Georgia's defense gave up some big plays to Baker Mayfield and Oklahoma's offense, but Jalen Hurts is not the Heisman Trophy winner. Alabama's defense got 5 sacks on Clemson quarterback Kelly Bryant, but Georgia's offense and offensive line have been one of the best in the nation, 15th in fact, only allowing 16 sacks all year. The final stat on Georgia's offense versus Alabama's defense, Georgia's offense ranks 36th in the nation, averaging 454 yards per game, while Alabama's defense is 2nd best overall in the nation, only allowing an average of 258 yards per game. Who will break first? Now let's shift to when Alabama has the ball, and of course they are led by quarterback Jalen Hurts, who just passed 2,000 yards passing in the Sugar Bowl win over Clemson. He has 61.4% completion percentage on the season with 17 passing touchdowns, but his real threat comes in the running game where he has 808 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. Hurts also is very careful with the ball as he only has 1 interception on the season, and that came in the Arkansas game back in October. That stat alone has helped Alabama amass a plus 13 turnover margin on the season, which dwarfs Georgia's plus 5. So if turnovers become an issue in the game, there is a chance based on statistics that it'll be Georgia turning it over to Alabama. Just like Georgia's offense is led by the rushing attack, so is Alabama's, as they always have been since 2008 under Nick Saban. They are led by running back Damian Harris, who is just 17 yards shy of 1,000 rushing yards on the season. He averages 7.6 yards per carry and has 11 rushing touchdowns. Last year's playoff darling in running back Bo Scarborough has 573 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns, and that doesn't even include the backup running backs, which would be starters at pretty much every other school in the country, and players like Najee Harris and Josh Jacobs and Brian Robinson Jr. if Saban decides to just keep throwing running backs at this Georgia defensive line. Alabama's rush offense is number 10 in the nation, averaging about 265 yards per game, but only had 141 in the win against Clemson, a defense that is very similar to Georgia's front seven. When Georgia has the ball, the best player on the field is probably defensive back Minkah Fitzpatrick. When Alabama has the ball, the best player on the field is probably Georgia linebacker Roquan Smith, who along with fellow linebacker Lorenzo Carter will probably be in the gaps of the Alabama offensive line all night. In fact, the Georgia defense is number 12 in the country in the rushing attack, only allowing an average of 113 yards on the ground per game. Alabama's offense has also found itself in a little bit of trouble at times in 3rd and long situations, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 9. That's not exactly what you want against a Georgia defense that is in the top 10 and allowing first downs in the nation. Again, whichever offense ends up trying to get explosive plays down the field is probably going to have to do so more frequently in the passing game, and Jalen Hurts' favorite target is wide receiver Calvin Ridley, who is 65 yards shy of 1,000 receiving yards on the season, but only has 4 receiving touchdowns. Freshman wide receivers Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs III have combined for nearly 500 receiving yards and 7 receiving touchdowns. Hurts averages about 194 passing yards per game, but Georgia's pass defense, led by DeAndre Baker, is number 2 in the nation, only allowing an average of 158 yards through the air per game. Alabama's offense averages 39.1 points per game, good for 12th best in the nation, but Georgia's scoring defense is 4th best in the nation, allowing only an average of 13.2 yards per game. This is the same Georgia defense that did give up 31 first-half points to Oklahoma, so they must be more disciplined in this national championship game. Overall, Alabama's offense is ranked 20th in the nation, averaging 465 yards per game, but Georgia's overall defense is the 4th best in the nation, only allowing 271 yards per game. If the national championship game comes down to kicking, and let's face it, there's an excellent chance it very well might, then I think Georgia has the edge. Rodrigo Blankenship and his awesome kicking goggles is 100% on extra points this season and is 17 of 20 overall on field goals. He's 4 of 7 beyond 50 yards and has a long of 55 on the year. Alabama senior kicker Andy Papanastos is also perfect on extra points and 16 of 21 from field goals, but only has a long of 46, meaning Georgia could theoretically strike, especially in a dome, much further away than Alabama can. Georgia punter Cameron Niziolak also averaged 48 yards per punt in the Rose Bowl with a long of 61, and even though Alabama punter J.K. Scott will get all of the punter buzz, if that's a thing, it will be a chance that Georgia could flip the field a little bit better than maybe even Alabama can. So those are the stats. That is kind of what the stat sheet of the game looks like, kind of where I may kind of go in my prediction. Now, for Georgia, on offense, I think their biggest thing is they need to get some kind of a passing game going in order to open up the running lanes. Yes, you could say this about Alabama too, but I think with a freshman quarterback in the biggest start of, ever for Georgia, I think it's really important, especially early, to set a tone of trying to get, even if it's just 5 yards down the field, to get some passes going in order to open up Chubb and Michelle and Swift up the middle, and any kind of screens they may run could end up helping that. On defense, they need to flush Jalen Hurts out of the pocket almost every single play, as much as they can. They need to be bringing guys up the middle, flushing him out. When I was watching the Iron Bowl, that's exactly what they did. Jalen never had a time to set his feet and look down the field, and Auburn made him pay almost every single time Alabama tried to throw the ball. As for Alabama, of course, they need to also pass the ball, but I'm thinking more big for them. I think they need to try some really big shots to take the top off of the defense, get Calvin Ridley or Jerry Jeudy down the sideline and just kind of chuck it and see what happens a couple of times, a couple of risks early to allow some of those run-pass options, something that Jalen can do that Fromm can't do as much. He can, Jalen can run, and he is a real threat in the running game, a lot more than Jake Fromm is. So anytime that he looks like he's going to run, you're going to have defenders bite, and maybe that's where they can connect down the field. I really do think this is going to be a very even matchup. I think it'll be back and forth all game. This is a really weird way to frame it, but I think this is going to be like a defensive version of the 2012 SEC Championship. One team will make a huge stop, the next team will get a huge stop, it'll be a turnover, and then a field goal, and then a field goal, and then a turnover, and it'll kind of go back and forth like that. I certainly don't think the final score will be 50-48. The line is Alabama by 3.5 currently as I'm filming this. Alabama was favored against every single other team in the college football playoff, even before they were officially in the playoff, even before Selection Sunday. Again, I do think the crowd is going to be probably 65-35 in Georgia's favor. They won the Rose Bowl first. It's in their backyard, so they had like a 4-hour head start on Alabama fans purchasing secondhand tickets. So I do think it'll be loaded with red and black. I don't really think that'll faze Alabama too much. This is a very experienced team, a very mature team. Even though they've lost a lot of talent over the years, all of these guys have been here. They know what these games are like. Georgia has been to one SEC championship and one playoff game. Alabama's been to several of each of those at this point, including this will be their third straight national championship. So I certainly think experience favors the Tide. If you remember, in the very first Georgia-Auburn game, if you watch the game, Georgia kind of got swept away by the momentum of Auburn, and yes, Auburn's crowd, which won't really be a factor in this game, but I felt like they got swept away by the moment a little bit, and the SEC championship was their redemption. Alabama, when they played Auburn, it was more of a case of their injuries finally catching up to them. But for the most part, Alabama is a much healthier team than they were a month or a month and a half ago when they played Auburn, and throughout that month of November where they also had tough games against LSU and Mississippi State. And after the Clemson game, a lot of the Alabama defensive players in locker room talks and interviews with reporters said that they felt like they had a chip on their shoulder, that a lot of people around the nation said that they did not belong in the playoff, that they didn't belong in that game, that Clemson was going to beat them. All of the computers picked an Alabama-Georgia national championship game. All of the human voters, for the most part, picked a Clemson-Oklahoma game. And I think both of these teams felt that, but Alabama felt that more because they were the team that barely got in over Ohio State. And I think an Alabama team with a chip on its shoulder, coached by Nick Saban, is a dangerous, dangerous team. I think that Alabama is going to beat Georgia in a very close game. I do not expect it to be easy. As a Georgia player put it a couple years ago, this will be grown man football. I think it's going to be a tough, brutal, hard-hitting game, especially in the linemen. I think they're all going to hit each other extraordinarily hard. Both defenses are going to be worn out by the end of the game, so don't be a little caught off guard if there's a little bit more scoring in the second half than the first half. I think both teams are going to try to wear down each other, but I do have Alabama winning their 11th AP National Championship. So, this was a little bit longer of a video. I wanted, since it's a national championship game, to try to preview it and break it down the best I could. I hope I did a good job, but now it's your turn. Let me know down below in the comment section who you think is going to win. Is Georgia going to be the national champions for the first time since 1980, or Alabama be the national champions for the first time since like a little while ago, 2 years ago? Let me know that down below in the comment section and tell me a couple of keys as to what everybody should be looking out for and why you think they're going to win. I think that'll be really interesting. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can also click the circle right there in order to subscribe or watch any of the other videos over there to the right that YouTube has suggested for you. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time. Have won national championships, perhaps it's finally Georgia's turn. Nick Saban will be trying to win his very first national championship at Alabama without Kirby Smart as his defensive coordinator. The good news is that the Tide's experience is ripe with big moments. If they are a true senior or a redshirt junior or younger, every single player on this Crimson Tide team has been in the playoff every single year. And if they are a true junior or younger, they have all played in the College Football Playoff National Championship game. This will also be the second ever national championship. Hey lifers, Dustin here, and it is finally time to talk about the one game that the entire 2017 college football season has been building and leading up to, and that is the 2018 College Football Playoff National Championship game. It's the champion of 2017, but they call it the 2018 champ. You know how it works. It's really dumb. And it doesn't make any sense, and I hate it with my whole heart. But it is the 2018 National Championship game between the number 3 Georgia Bulldogs and the number 4 Alabama Crimson Tide. I will put a little disclaimer at the very beginning of this video. Georgia Bulldogs, with all 3 victories being in their last 3 meetings, in 2008 in Athens, 2012 SEC Championship game, and their most recent meeting, 2015, a 38-10 Tide win in a rain-soaked Athens with current Georgia head coach Kirby Smarts serving as Alabama's defensive coordinator. There are plenty of storylines going on in this game, not the least of which is this will be Georgia's very first true crack at a national championship since the 1980 season featuring Herschel Walker and Vince Dooley. Since 1980, 5 different SEC teams have. Auburn fans, you may want to skip this one. These 2 SEC teams got here by having very different types of victories on Monday. Georgia, of course, won a classic 2-overtime shootout win. Well, shootout, run out, however you want to put it, win over Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl, while Alabama dominated Clemson in the trenches, limiting the Tigers to a season low in yardage as Alabama's defense took over in a win in the Sugar Bowl. Alabama leads the all-time series against the Bulldogs 38-25-4, with Nick Saban going 3-1 against the chip between 2 teams from the same conference. The only other time it happened was also the SEC, and also had Alabama in it in the 2012 BCS National Championship game between LSU and the Crimson Tide in LSU's de facto backyard in New Orleans. The Tide won that matchup 21-0 to secure Nick Saban's second national championship at Alabama. Almost said third because it was 2012. That doesn't make sense. This will be in Georgia's backyard, but Nick Saban is very familiar with that scene, with the building in the Georgia Dome / Mercedes-Benz Dome. Saban